The small town of Willowbrook wasn't much to look at. It had one main street lined with a bakery, a hardware store, and a few other shops that barely stayed open past sunset. Most people here worked hard just to get by, and John was no different. He spent his days fixing cars at the local garage, where oil stains and the smell of grease were as familiar as the sound of his own voice. His hands were always dirty, but they were also strong. Hands that could fix anything from an old tractor to a busted-up family sedan. John lived paycheck to paycheck, doing his best to support his wife and 2 kids. They weren't rich. Not even close, but they were happy. Or at least they tried to be. Life wasn't easy, but it was simple. That's what John liked about it. No surprises, no drama, just the steady rhythm of work, home, sleep, repeat. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. One chilly evening, after a long day at the garage, John was driving home on the winding road that led out of town. The sky was dark, and rain poured down in sheets, making visibility almost zero. The wipers on his old truck struggled to keep up, smearing water across the windshield. Still, he drove carefully, knowing these roads like the back of his hand. Then something caught his eye, a faint flicker of light near the edge of the forest. At first he thought it might be lightning or maybe someone's headlights parked off the road. But as he got closer, his stomach dropped. There, crumpled against a tree, was a sleek black car crushed beyond recognition. Smoke curled lazily into the air, mixing with the mist from the rain. John slammed on his brakes and pulled over without thinking twice. His heart pounded as he grabbed a flashlight from his glove compartment and stepped out into the storm. The cold wind bit at his face and the mud squelched under his boots as he hurried toward the wreckage. "Hello? Is anyone there?" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the rain. When he reached the car, he saw the driver slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious. Blood trickled down the side of their face, mingling with shards of broken glass. For a moment, John froze. He'd never been in a situation like this before. What if the car caught fire? What if the person inside didn't make it? But then he shook himself out of it. This wasn't the time to panic. Someone needed help, and he was the only one around. He dialed 911 with trembling fingers, giving the operator his location and describing the scene as calmly as he could. "There's smoke coming from the engine," he told her. "I think they hit the tree pretty hard." While waiting for the ambulance, John did everything he could. He grabbed a blanket from his truck and wrapped it around the injured person to keep them warm. When he noticed blood pooling near their head, he used his jacket to try and stop the bleeding. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as he sat there in the pouring rain, holding pressure against the wound and praying silently that help would arrive soon. Finally, the distant wail of sirens broke through the chaos. Paramedics rushed to the scene, taking over with practiced efficiency. One of them gave John a quick nod of thanks before loading the victim onto a stretcher. As they worked, John caught a glimpse of the person's face. It looked eerily familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. Once the ambulance sped away, lights flashing and siren blaring, John trudged back to his truck, soaked to the bone and exhausted. He glanced at his watch and realized how late it was. His boss hated it when employees left early, and tonight he definitely missed the end of his shift. As he drove home, guilt gnawed at him. Saving a stranger's life felt like the right thing to do, but would his boss see it that way? Would anyone understand why he'd stayed behind instead of clocking out on time? Little did John know, his decision to stop that night would change his life forever, in ways he couldn't have imagined. The next morning, John woke up feeling like a storm cloud was hanging over his head. His clothes were still damp from the rain, and his muscles ached from sitting in the mud by the wrecked car. But it wasn't just the physical discomfort that weighed on him. It was the sinking feeling in his gut. He knew he'd done the right thing by stopping to help, but now he had to face the consequences. When he got to work, the garage was eerily quiet. The usual clanging of tools and hum of chatter was replaced by an uncomfortable silence. His boss was waiting for him, arms crossed, looking angrier than John had ever seen him. "Where were you last night?" the boss demanded before John could even say hello. John swallowed hard. I stopped to help someone. There was an accident on the road out of town. A car crashed into a tree. Someone was hurt. The boss didn't look impressed. In fact, his scowl deepened. You left your shift early without permission. That's not how we run things here, John. You know the rules. But I called it in, John protested, his voice rising. I stayed there until the ambulance came. I couldn't just leave them there to die. His boss shook his head. Look, I don't care what you did or why you did it. The fact is, you abandoned your post. We can't have people walking off whenever they feel like it. You're fired, the you. Words hit John like a punch to the chest. Fired? Just like that? After all these years of showing up early, staying late, and working tirelessly, this was how it ended? Because he'd tried to save a life? John opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. What could he say? He knew the boss had a point. Technically, he had left early, but it didn't make the decision any easier to swallow. Defeated, he turned around and walked out of the garage, ignoring the sympathetic glances from his co-workers. By the time he got home, the weight of everything was crushing him. No job meant no money. No money meant no way to pay the rent, buy groceries, or keep the lights on. His wife tried to comfort him, telling him it would be okay, but he could see the worry in her eyes. She put on a brave face for the kids, but John knew she was scared too. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, John felt like he was drowning. He replayed the events of the past 24 hours over and over in his mind. Had he made the wrong choice? Should he have ignored the crash and kept driving? The thought made him sick to his stomach. Even if losing his job hurt, he knew he couldn't live with himself if he'd left that person to die. But knowing that didn't make things any easier. Over the next few days, John scoured the town for work. He knocked on doors, asked friends for leads, and even considered taking odd jobs just to bring in a little cash. Nothing panned out. Every no felt like another nail in the coffin of his hopes. Meanwhile, strange things started happening in Willowbrook. News vans began rolling into town, setting up cameras and microphones outside the local diner. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their rotors slicing through the quiet country air. At first, John paid no attention. He had bigger problems to worry about. But then he started hearing whispers. Apparently, the person he'd helped that rainy night wasn't just anyone. It was a wealthy businessman who owned companies all over the world, someone important, someone powerful, and according to the news, this man was alive because of John's actions. John didn't think much of it. Sure, it was nice to hear that the guy survived, but what difference did it make? He was still unemployed, still broke, and still stuck in the same mess he'd been in since the day he lost his job. Then, one afternoon, while he was tinkering with an old lawnmower for a neighbor, the helicopters returned. This time, they weren't just flying overhead. They were landing right behind his house. John dropped his wrench and stared in disbelief as 3 sleek black helicopters descended onto the field behind his property. Dust swirled everywhere, and chickens scattered in panic. His wife peeked out the window, her jaw dropping as dozens of men in suits climbed out of the choppers. One of them stood taller than the rest, dressed in a crisp suit and tie. John's heart raced. Who were these people? What did they want? And why were they here of all places? Before he could figure it out, the man in the suit started walking toward the house. His steps were confident, purposeful. As he approached, John realized something shocking. It was the same man from the crash, the one he'd pulled from the wreckage that fateful night. The man stopped just a few feet away, his expression calm but serious. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then, the stranger extended his hand. "You saved my life," he said simply. "And I'm here to thank you." John blinked, unsure if he was dreaming. Here was this man, this incredibly wealthy, influential man, standing in his muddy backyard, shaking his hand like they were old friends. John stammered, completely thrown off guard. "I just did what anyone would have done." The man smiled faintly. "Not everyone would have stopped. Believe me, I know." Before John could respond, the man gestured toward the house. May we talk inside? John nodded dumbly and let him in, his mind racing. His wife greeted them nervously, ushering the kids into another room while she brewed a pot of tea. The whole scene felt surreal, like something out of a movie. Once, they were seated at the kitchen table. The man leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Let me explain why I'm here," he began. "What you did for me that night changed everything, not just for me, but for my family. I owe you more than I can ever repay, so I've come to offer you something, a chance to start over." John frowned, confused. "Start over?" "Yes," the man replied. "Your employer has already been informed of what happened. If you'd like, your job will be reinstated, with back pay and a promotion. But I suspect you might prefer something else." With that, one of the suited men stepped forward, holding a briefcase. Inside were documents detailing opportunities, scholarships for John's children, funding for a new business venture, or even a position within the man's company. John sat there stunned. Was this really happening? Could one act of kindness truly turn his life around? As overwhelming as it was, one thing was clear. John's world was about to change in ways he never could have imagined. John sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the briefcase like it was some kind of magic box. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. Here was this man, this stranger who had shown up in helicopters and suits, offering him a way out of the mess his life had become. It sounded too good to be true. The businessman leaned back in his chair, studying John's face. He could see the hesitation written all over it. "Take your time," he said gently. "This isn't something you need to decide right now." But John couldn't help feeling like he needed answers. "Why are you doing this?" he blurted out before he could stop himself. "I mean, I stopped to help someone. That's all. Why go through all this trouble for me?" The man smiled, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "You might not realize it, but what you did wasn't just about stopping to help. It was about putting someone else's life ahead of your own needs. In today's world, that kind of selflessness is rare, and when someone shows me kindness like that, I believe in paying it forward." John shook his head, still struggling to wrap his mind around the situation. "But you don't even know me. You're offering me scholarships for my kids, money, to start a business. I don't understand why." "I don't need to know you," the man replied firmly. "What I saw that night tells me everything I need to know about your character. You didn't hesitate. You didn't ask questions or expect anything in return. You acted because it was the right thing to do. That's more than most people would have done." John felt a lump rise in his throat. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. Like his actions mattered. Like he was worth something. For years he'd been told he wasn't smart enough, ambitious enough, or talented enough. But here was this man, treating him like a hero. Still, the weight of the decision pressed down on him. Accepting such generosity felt overwhelming. What if he failed? What if he let this man down? His wife walked back into the room, carrying a tray with cups of tea. She set it down on the table and gave John a reassuring smile. "It's okay," she said softly. "Whatever you decide, we'll figure it out together." Her words steadied him a little. He took a deep breath and turned back to the businessman. "If I were to say yes, what would happen next?" The man nodded, as if he'd been expecting the question. "Well, first you'd have to choose which path you want to take. If you'd rather go back to the garage, I'll handle everything with your old boss. They'll welcome you back with open arms along with a raise and better hours. But if you're interested in starting fresh," he gestured toward the documents in the briefcase, "we can fund a new business venture for you, something you're passionate about. Or if you prefer, there's an opportunity to join my team. You wouldn't be stuck fixing cars anymore. You'd be working alongside some of the brightest minds in the industry." John glanced at his wife, who looked both excited and nervous. This wasn't just about him. It was about their family. Whatever choice he made would affect all of them. After a long pause, John spoke slowly. I think I'd like to try something new. Something for myself. My kids deserve better than watching me struggle every day." The businessman smiled warmly. Good choice. Let's talk details. Over the next hour, they hashed out a plan. The businessman explained that he'd provide the capital to start an auto repair shop. Not just any shop, but a modern, eco-friendly facility equipped with the latest technology. He promised to guide John through the process of setting it up, helping him learn how to manage finances, hire employees, and market the business. At first, John worried he wouldn't be able to handle it. Running a business was a far cry from fixing engines, but the businessman reassured him. "You've got grit," he said. "That's half the battle. As for the rest, I'll make sure you have all the support you need." As the meeting wrapped up, the businessman stood and extended his hand again. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Not just for saving my life, but for reminding me of what truly matters. People like you are the reason I believe in humanity." John shook his hand, still feeling like he was dreaming. When the helicopters lifted off and disappeared into the sky, he turned to his wife and exhaled deeply. "Well," he said with a shaky laugh, "that was wild." She hugged him tightly, her eyes shining. "This is our chance, John, our fresh start." In the weeks that followed, things began to move quickly. Construction crews arrived in Willowbrook to build the new shop, and word spread fast about John's unexpected windfall. At first, he worried people might resent him for getting such a big break, but instead the town rallied around him. Neighbors offered to help however they could, whether it was volunteering during construction or spreading the word about the upcoming grand opening. Even his old co-workers from the garage pitched in. One of them, a gruff mechanic named Tom, showed up one afternoon with a toolbox in hand. "Figured you could use an extra pair of hands," he said gruffly. "Besides, I owe you for teaching me how to fix that transmission last year." John grinned, grateful for the gesture. Slowly but surely, he started to feel like maybe, just maybe, he could pull this off. As the pieces came together, John found himself thinking about the businessman often. He'd only met him once, but the man's words stuck with him. "When someone shows me kindness, I believe in paying it forward." John realized that's exactly what he wanted to do with this opportunity. He didn't just want to build a successful business. He wanted to give back to the community that had always supported him. So when the shop was finally finished, a sleek, modern building with solar panels on the roof and a sign that read, "Carter's Auto Repair," John made sure to include a special program. Every month he offered free services to families in need, whether it was fixing a broken-down car or performing routine maintenance. On the day of the grand opening, the whole town turned out to celebrate. There were balloons, banners, and a ribbon-cutting ceremony that drew applause from everyone in attendance. As John stood in front of the crowd, surrounded by his family and friends, he felt a surge of pride. For so long he'd doubted himself. He'd believed he wasn't good enough, that his life would always be defined by struggles and setbacks. But now, standing here in this moment, he knew he'd proven himself wrong. And it all started with one simple act of kindness on a rainy night. A reminder that sometimes doing the right thing can change your life in ways you never expect. Running a business was harder than John ever imagined. Sure, the new shop looked amazing, sleek and modern with shiny equipment and eco-friendly features that made it stand out in Willowbrook. But as the weeks turned into months, John quickly learned that owning a business wasn't just about fixing cars. It was about managing people, keeping track of money, dealing with unexpected problems, and making decisions that could either make or break everything he'd worked for. At first, things seemed to go smoothly. The grand opening had been a huge success, drawing customers from all over town. People were curious about the hero mechanic who'd saved a wealthy stranger's life, and many wanted to support his new venture. Word spread fast, and soon the shop was bustling with activity. John hired a small team of mechanics, including Tom, his old co-worker, who became his right-hand man. Together, they tackled repairs big and small, earning praise from customers for their quick work and honest pricing. But as the initial excitement wore off, reality set in. Some days the bills piled up faster than the cash coming in. Suppliers charged more than expected, equipment broke down unexpectedly, and there were slow weeks when hardly anyone came through the door. On top of that, John struggled to balance his time between working on cars and handling the administrative side of the business. He'd never been great with numbers, and staring at spreadsheets late at night left him frustrated and exhausted. One particularly rough week, a customer stormed into the shop, furious because their car hadn't been ready on time. John apologized, profusely, explaining that a part they needed had been delayed, but the man wasn't satisfied. He demanded a refund and threatened to leave a bad review online. John felt his stomach drop. A negative review could hurt the shop's reputation, especially since they were still building trust in the community. That evening, after everyone else had gone home, John sat alone in the office, staring at the clock. His wife brought him dinner, but he barely touched it. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted, his voice heavy with doubt. "What if I mess this up? What if I let everyone down?" She sat beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're not going to mess this up," she said firmly. "Look how far you've come already. You didn't give up when life got tough before, and you won't now. Besides, you're not alone in this. We're all here to help." Her words gave him a little comfort, but the pressure didn't ease overnight. Over the next few days, John threw himself into finding solutions. He reached out to the businessman who'd helped him, asking for advice. To his surprise, the man responded almost immediately, inviting John to meet him for lunch at a nearby cafe. When John arrived, the businessman greeted him warmly as if they were old friends catching up. After ordering coffee, he leaned forward and asked, "How's it going?" John hesitated, unsure where to start. Finally, he sighed and said, "It's harder than I thought it would be. I feel like I'm drowning some days." The businessman nodded knowingly. "Starting a business is never easy," he said. "Even with all the resources in the world, there are challenges you can't predict. But that's part of the journey. Every failure teaches you something valuable." "Failure isn't exactly what I signed up for," John muttered, half joking. "No one signs up for failure," the businessman replied with a chuckle. "But it's unavoidable. The key is learning from it and moving forward. Trust me, I've failed more times than I can count. Those moments shaped me into who I am today." He went on to share stories from his own career, talking about mistakes he'd made and lessons he'd learned along the way. By the end of the conversation, John felt a renewed sense of determination. Maybe this wasn't supposed to be easy. Maybe the struggles were part of what made success meaningful. With renewed energy, John returned to the shop and implemented changes based on the businessman's advice. He streamlined the scheduling system to avoid delays, invested in training for his team to improve efficiency, and started offering loyalty discounts to encourage repeat customers. Slowly but surely, the shop began to stabilize. Business picked up again, and the angry customer even came back, apologizing for his outburst and praising the quality of the repair. Despite the progress, John knew he couldn't rest on his laurels. He kept pushing himself to grow, both personally and professionally. One day, while chatting with a customer, he realized there was an opportunity to expand the shop's services. Many people in Willowbrook owned older vehicles that required specialized parts which weren't always easy to find. Inspired, John decided to create a small inventory of hard-to-find components, saving customers the hassle of searching elsewhere. The idea paid off. Not only did it attract more business, but it also earned him a reputation as someone who truly cared about his customers' needs. People started recommending Carter's Auto Repair to friends and family, and positive reviews poured in online. Before long, the shop was thriving, not just surviving. Through it all, John remained humble. He knew none of this would have been possible without the kindness of others, from the businessman who believed in him to the townsfolk who supported his dream. Determined to pay it forward, he launched a program called Wheels for Hope, offering free repairs to low-income families and single parents struggling to make ends meet. He also partnered with a local charity to provide job training for young people interested in mechanics, giving them hands-on experience and a chance to build better futures. As the months passed, John noticed a shift, not just in his business, but in himself. He no longer doubted his abilities or questioned whether he deserved this second chance. Instead, he embraced the challenges. Knowing each one brought him closer to his goals. For the first time in years, he felt proud of what he'd accomplished and excited about what lay ahead. One evening, as he locked up the shop and headed home, he paused to look at the sign glowing softly in the twilight. Carter's Auto Repair. It represented more than just a place to fix cars. It symbolized resilience, gratitude, and the power of kindness to change lives, including his own. As the months turned into years, John's auto repair shop became more than just a place to fix cars. It became a beacon of hope for the entire town. People from neighboring communities started hearing about Carter's Auto Repair and made the drive to Willowbrook just to experience the exceptional service and friendly atmosphere. The shop wasn't just known for its technical expertise, it was known for its heart. Every customer who walked through the doors felt like family, and that was all thanks to John. But running a successful business didn't mean life suddenly became easy. If anything, the challenges only grew bigger as the shop expanded. With success came new responsibilities, managing a larger team, handling more complex finances, and dealing with the occasional difficult customer. There were days when John wondered if he'd bitten off more than he could chew. He often found himself staying late at the shop, poring over invoices and trying to figure out how to keep everything running smoothly. One particularly rough week, a major supplier unexpectedly raised their prices, leaving John scrambling to adjust his budget. At the same time, one of his best mechanics quit without warning, citing personal reasons. To top it all off, a local competitor launched a smear campaign, spreading false rumors about John's business in an attempt to steal his customers. For the first time in a long while, John felt overwhelmed. That's when the businessman showed up again. It had been months since John last saw him, but there he was, walking into the shop unannounced on a rainy afternoon. John was elbow-deep in grease working on a stubborn engine when he looked up and spotted the familiar face. "Well, this brings back memories," the businessman joked, gesturing to the oily rag in John's hand. John laughed despite himself. "Yeah, except this time I'm the boss getting my hands dirty." The two men sat down in the office where John vented about everything that had been going wrong. The businessman listened patiently, nodding along as John explained the supplier issue, the loss of a key employee, and the nasty rumors being spread about him. When John finished, he slumped back in his chair, exhausted. "I don't know what to do," he admitted. "I feel like I'm fighting battles on every side." The businessman smiled knowingly. "You're not alone in feeling that way," he said. "Every successful person goes through seasons like this. The question is, how do you respond?" John frowned. "What do you mean?" "Challenges are inevitable," the businessman explained, "but they also present opportunities to grow, to adapt, and to prove your resilience. Right now you have a choice. You can let these setbacks defeat you, or you can use them to make your business stronger." He went on to share practical advice, suggesting ways John could renegotiate with suppliers, hire and train new employees, and counteract the negative publicity by doubling down on customer satisfaction. By the end of their conversation, John felt a renewed sense of clarity. "You're right," he said finally. "This isn't the end. It's just another chapter." With the businessman's guidance, John implemented changes that turned the tide. He reached out to alternative suppliers, securing better rates and ensuring a steady flow of parts. He held interviews to find a replacement mechanic, prioritizing candidates who shared his values of hard work and integrity. And to combat the rumors, he launched a social media campaign featuring testimonials from happy customers, showcasing the positive impact his shop had on the community. Within weeks, the negativity faded, and business picked up again. What could have been a disaster instead became a turning point, a reminder that even the toughest obstacles could be overcome with determination and support. As the shop continued to thrive, John realized something important. Success wasn't just about avoiding failure. It was about learning how to rise above it. Each challenge he faced taught him valuable lessons about leadership, perseverance, and the importance of surrounding himself with good people. Tom, his trusted right-hand man, became more than just an employee. He became a close friend and confidant, Together they tackled problems head-on, supporting each other through thick and thin. John's wife remained his rock, always encouraging him to keep pushing forward, even when things felt impossible. And the townsfolk of Willowbrook rallied around him, proving time and again that kindness and loyalty weren't just words, they were actions. One day, as John stood outside the shop watching a line of cars pull in for service, he reflected on how much his life had changed. Gone were the days of struggling to make ends meet, of wondering if he'd ever catch a break. Now he had stability, purpose, and a legacy he could be proud of. But what struck him most was the realization that none of this would have happened without that single act of kindness on a dark, rainy night. Stopping to help a stranger hadn't just saved a life. It had set off a chain reaction of events that transformed his own. John began thinking about ways he could pay it forward on an even larger scale. He remembered the businessman's words, "Kindness has a ripple effect." Inspired, John decided to expand his efforts beyond Willowbrook. He partnered with nearby towns to offer mobile repair services for low-income families, bringing his expertise directly to those who needed it most. He also started hosting free workshops on car maintenance, teaching people basic skills so they could save money and avoid costly repairs. Word of John's initiative spread quickly, earning him recognition far beyond the borders of his small town. Local newspapers wrote articles about him, calling him a community hero. Radio hosts invited him on air to talk about his journey, and schools asked him to speak to students about the value of hard work and compassion. Through it all, John stayed grounded. He never forgot where he came from or the struggles that shaped him. Instead, he used his experiences to inspire others, reminding them that no matter how tough life gets, there's always a way forward, if you're willing to take it. By the time the 5th anniversary of Carter's auto repair rolled around, John threw a massive celebration. The entire town turned out for the event, filling the parking lot with laughter, music, and food. Kids played games, adults swapped stories, and everyone enjoyed free car washes and oil changes. It was a day of gratitude, not just for John, but for the entire community that had supported him every step of the way. As fireworks lit up the night sky, John stood beside his wife, looking out at the crowd. His heart swelled with pride and love. They'd come so far together, overcoming obstacles and building something truly special. "Thank you," he whispered to her, his voice thick with emotion. "For what?" she asked, smiling. "For believing in me," he replied. "Even when I didn't believe in myself." She squeezed his hand tightly. "Always." In that moment, surrounded by friends, family, and neighbors, John knew he'd created something lasting, not just a business, but a legacy rooted in kindness, resilience, and the belief that one person really can make a difference. Years had passed since that rainy night when John's life took an unexpected turn. Willowbrook was no longer the sleepy, overlooked town it once was. Thanks to John's thriving auto repair shop, the community had grown stronger and more connected than ever before. His business wasn't just a place to fix cars. It had become a cornerstone of the town, a symbol of hope and possibility. The Wheels for Hope program had expanded beyond what John could have imagined. Families who couldn't afford repairs now had reliable transportation to get to work, school, and doctor appointments. Young people in the job training program were landing positions at other garages or starting their own small businesses. Some even returned to thank John personally, sharing how his mentorship had changed their lives. John often stood outside the shop, watching as customers came and went. He'd see parents bringing in their kids' beat-up old cars for tune-ups, teenagers learning how to change oil under Tom's guidance, and elderly neighbors chatting over coffee while waiting for their vehicles. Each interaction reminded him of why he'd started this journey in the first place, not for fame or fortune, but to make a difference. One crisp autumn morning, John received a letter in the mail. It was addressed in elegant handwriting, and his heart skipped a beat as he recognized the return address. The businessman who had helped him all those years ago was inviting him to a special event in the city, a gathering of entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and community leaders. At the bottom of the invitation was a handwritten note. "You belong here, John. Come share your story." For a moment, John hesitated. Him? Among those high-powered individuals? He didn't feel like he fit into that world. But then he thought about everything he'd overcome, the struggles, the doubts, the hard-earned lessons, and realized his story might inspire others facing similar challenges. With his wife's encouragement, he accepted the invitation. The day of the event arrived, and John dressed in his best suit, feeling both nervous and excited. When he walked into the grand hall, he was struck by the buzz of conversation and the glimmer of chandeliers overhead. The room was filled with people dressed in expensive clothes, sipping champagne and exchanging business cards. John felt out of place until he spotted the businessman across the room. The man waved him over with a warm smile. "You made it," he said, clapping John on the back. "I'm glad." Before John could respond, the lights dimmed, and the host stepped onto the stage to introduce the speakers. To John's surprise, his name was called early in the program. As he walked up to the podium, his palms were sweaty, and his legs felt unsteady. But when he looked out at the audience, he saw friendly faces nodding in encouragement, including the businessman, who gave him a thumbs up. John took a deep breath and began to speak. He told them about growing up in Willowbrook, working long hours at the garage and struggling to provide for his family. He recounted the night of the accident, the rain, the wrecked car, the stranger whose life he saved without expecting anything in return. He described the fear of losing his job, the overwhelming generosity of the businessman, and the hard work it took to build his dream from scratch. "I'm not standing here today because I'm smart or talented," John said, his voice steady now. "I'm here because someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. And because of that, I learned something important. Kindness has a ripple effect. One act can change a life, and that life can go on to change others." The room erupted in applause, and John felt a lump rise in his throat. For so many years he doubted his worth, convinced he wasn't good enough. Now, surrounded by people who respected and admired him, he finally understood that his value wasn't measured by wealth or status. It was defined by the impact he'd made on those around him. After the event, dozens of attendees approached John to shake his hand and thank him for his inspiring words. Some asked for advice on starting their own businesses, while others simply wanted to hear more about his journey. One young woman, barely out of college, shared her dream of opening a nonprofit to help underserved communities. "If you can do it," she said, her eyes shining, "then maybe I can too." By the time John returned home, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Over the next few years, he continued to grow his business, always keeping the needs of his community at the forefront. He partnered with schools to offer internships, donated tools and equipment to aspiring mechanics, and hosted annual fundraisers to support local charities. His efforts earned him recognition far beyond Willowbrook, but none of that mattered to him as much as seeing the smiles on his neighbors' faces. Eventually, John's children grew up and moved away to pursue their own dreams. His oldest became a teacher, passionate about helping kids succeed. His youngest followed in his footsteps, studying engineering and eventually joining the family business. Together, they transformed Carter's Auto Repair into a regional chain, expanding its reach while staying true to its roots. As John entered his later years, he spent less time fixing cars and more time mentoring young entrepreneurs. He loved hearing their ideas and offering guidance based on his experiences. On quiet evenings, he'd sit on the porch with his wife, reflecting on how far they'd come since those difficult days after the accident. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night?" she asked one evening, breaking the peaceful silence. John smiled, gazing at the stars. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I think about it differently now. That night wasn't just about saving someone's life. It was about choosing kindness, even when it was hard. And look where that choice led us." His wife squeezed his hand. "To think it all started with a broken-down car and a little bit of courage." John nodded, feeling grateful for every twist and turn along the way. Life hadn't been perfect, but it had been full. full of challenges, triumphs, and moments that reminded him of the power of compassion. In the end, John's legacy wasn't just the successful business or the programs he created. It was the countless lives he touched through simple acts of kindness, proving that even in the smallest towns, ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things.